My little brother Sam and I never thought it strange that there was a church attached to our house. Even found it odd to visit friends and find they didn't have one of their own. On one of our occasional visits to Dad's side of the family, Sam wandered the house for some time before Uncle Joe asked him what he was looking for. Utterly baffled, Sam asked, "Where's your church, Uncle Joe?" It was the only home we had ever known, one in proximity to a church sanctuary. Our sanctuary was attached to the parsonage by a creaky hallway with a bathroom and 2 bedrooms claiming doorways off its short span. The hallway was usually dark, a place between places, traversed on the way to somewhere else, from my room to Sam's, from anywhere in the parsonage to the restroom, from the restroom to the kitchen or the playroom, from anywhere in the parsonage to the sanctuary. No one appreciated the hallway like I did. I was 3, maybe 4 years old when I discovered it. I stood still in black silence, the worn floorboards at rest below my feet. The darkness moved in forms I couldn't quite make out. The silence rang in my ears and made me want both to stay and listen, and to run away as fast as I could. I stood for a time, moments or longer. Then I ran. Room to room in the parsonage, I conducted a hurried search for someone to share my discovery. Sam was not in our bedroom, and the bathroom was unoccupied. The living room was empty, except for its furnishings. There was the overstuffed burgundy recliner, a television on a thrifted nightstand, the coffee table, and the black and white stripes of our threadbare couch. 2 cheap metal frames hung on the walls, both 36 by 18 inches and fitted with glass. The silver frame on the wall behind the couch wrapped around a piece of muslin embroidered in black lines by the hand of a grandmother I never met, horses in the style of a cartoon from The New Yorker. The gold frame behind the television over the window held a cardboard panel printed with the words Big Al and a figure in jeans and a red plaid shirt like the man on the rolls of brawny paper towels Mom kept in the kitchen. Big Al held several heads of lettuce in his muscled arms under his gleaming smile. I hurried through the living room, kicked the door open to my parents' bedroom, and jumped off the worn wooden step. My feet landed with a familiar thump on the padded carpet. Their queen bed was neatly made, and light from the window cast a shadowed grid across the patterned quilt, the desk, and the bookshelves. How the Irish Saved Civilization, Grey's Anatomy, The Four Loves, and A History of American Culinary Art were among the titles, though I was unable to read them at the time. At no sign of a companion to share my revelation, I fled the room and turned, nearly knocked my shin on the flagstone hearth Dad built for the old Ashley wood stove that kept the living room sweltering in winter. On my way to the playroom, where Mom's daycare kids ate and played and fought and napped, I spotted Dad in the kitchen. The cabinets lining the walls were thick with layers of paint that Mom changed again and again. "Careful in the kitchen," she'd say, "the paint is wet." The round oak table perched like an island in the middle of a speckled gray linoleum sea, adorned with a dried flower arrangement, roses and baby's breath with bright petals and vibrant stems turned sepia. Light eased in from a row of windows, gazing out at the backyard, and set aglow the oven and formica countertops. Dad stood at the table and set a warm slice of toast on a plate. He picked up a blunt knife and scraped 2 strokes of butter across the browned crumb. I tugged at his elbow, just over my head, and grabbed one of his giant, warm hands with both of my small ones. His hands were rough and calloused from years of construction work. He spent years laying block for a living, and I had seen him effortlessly carry railroad ties and bags of dry cement over his shoulders with nothing but a huff and a bead of sweat. His hands always seemed so rugged, unflinching. But when I took one of his hands in both of mine, they had a kind of give to them, as though I was the strong one. I led him across the living room, down a gentle slope into the darkness of the hallway. I let go of his hand to pull the door closed behind us, and we stood for a moment in the quiet of the place. "Look, Daddy, I found some dark." I touched the warmth of his hand again before he lifted it to stroke the top of my head. "Well, yeah, I guess you did." I could hear the smile in his voice. The snap of the light switch echoed down the hall and bounced off the sanctuary door. The weak fixture over our heads flickered to a soft glow. Dad gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze, then pushed the hallway door open. walked back to the kitchen. I stood on the tips of my toes and reached as high as I could, felt the stretch all the way to the joints in my fingers. I couldn't reach the switch. I didn't want the darkness remedied. I wanted to share it. Darkness didn't scare me. Shadows were my friends. My eyes were drawn to tiny shadows trembling on the rough pavement of our neighborhood streets before I looked up to see leafy trees made luminous in sunlight. There was a small hope that my shadow, like Peter Pan's, would wave back at me or point in some direction I had not seen. I watched in awe of her obedience to my every move, her shifting lengths and widths throughout the day. When it was my choice to step into a closet or a quiet hallway, being alone in the dark was nourishing. When that aloneness was not taken by choice, the taste of terror was ever so close. I never liked being the last person awake at night. At bedtime, Mom and Dad would come to tuck me in, and every night I would tell them, "Good night, see you in the morning, I love you, and how late will you be up?" They would respond with the maddeningly vague, "As long as I need to be." Mom would kiss a tissue and place it in my hand. Her mother had kissed many a tissue for her, and she would kiss many a tissue for me. I'd cling to mine, a token of companionship in the solitude of the night, and slip into a peaceful sleep. Changing scenes here. When I was 8 years old, I spoke in tongues for the first time. I was in the sanctuary. The lights were off, but 4 windows along the north wall kept the room from total darkness and glinted light off the golden strips of metal that bordered the carpet, where the floor turned to oak slats underneath the pews. The carpet matched the praise banners that hung from the back of the upright piano and the pulpit and the communion table, blue felt backgrounds boasting gold and pearl-accented doves and crosses. Mom sat with me on the edge of the platform that curved underneath the beams of the vacant cross mounted on the front wall, the same place where she would later tell me about my body and boys' bodies and the shocking way in which they crashed together to create new life. She asked if I had heard her speak in tongues. I said yes. Before sunup that very morning, I opened my eyes to the familiar creak of the living room floor. Mom was the first in the family to rise, around 4 every morning. I slipped out from under the warm covers and pressed my toes into the carpet, stepped softly around the places near the bedroom door and down the hall that I knew would whine under my weight, betray my clandestine morning ritual. I slid down the wall just outside the living room, rested on the cold, hard floor in the hallway, and watched Mom as she prayed. She sat in the recliner, motionless except for her lips. She murmured, whispered. I could only hear the occasional k or t sounds. Her hands rested on an open book, a Bible with a worn black leather binding, thin pages marked with her revelations. Dad and others blessed us with the gift more boisterously during worship on Sundays and in midweek prayer gatherings. Dad began in a whisper, hands pressed together, touching his lips. Then his voice raised and his hands opened and lifted, upturned to receive whatever word the Lord would speak to him. Betty, the church pianist, could be counted on to give a word in tongues, sometimes an interpretation with it. She kept the piano tinkling with one hand and raised the other, palm facing the congregation and pressing toward us as she spoke a word of rebuke for our lack of faith. Charlotte situated herself on the floor during Friday night's hour of intercessory prayer, rolled onto her back and groaned, breathed heavily as she uttered without interpretation, writhed and clawed at the carpet. Yes, I had seen the gift of tongues in practice. Mom didn't have as much to explain as when she told me exactly where babies came from. It would have been strange if I didn't know what it was or if I didn't eventually receive it, so I did. I forced my lips to its service. Mom prayed with me, and I made funny sounds with my mouth. It was strange. Didn't feel inspired the way it looked when others did it, sometimes in near erotic pleasure, always deeply engaged in the emotion of the moment. I felt nothing but the strangeness of the syllables burbling through my lips. Dad had a similar conversation with Sam, or tried to, when Sam was old enough to understand the gravity of his decision. Sam refused the gift of tongues and bravely, as he would many other things that I slipped into without thought beyond the knowledge of what was expected of me. Sam was younger and smaller than me, but strong and unafraid. I felt the impact on my lower lip and a crack that jolted all the way to my stomach. My mouth filled, warm and metallic, and I screamed. Sam scurried off my back and tried to apologize. He didn't mean to hurt me, he said, just to tackle me. Mom had a daycare center she ran out of the parsonage for some 15 years. We were in the playroom with several other children. The long folding table bridged across the middle of the room and reached toward the massive toy box Dad built into the wall. 3 or 4 fluorescent fixtures sent a dull glare across the whiteboard that covered the adjoining wall. There were dry erase markers perched across the top of the board, like crows on the power line outside the sanctuary. Red, blue, green, and black. I was about to shimmy around the end of the table to pick up a marker when Sam's arms came around my shoulders from behind. The full weight of his body landed on my back, and my knees buckled. I felt my body lurch in slow motion forward and down, straight into the chipped plywood edge of the toy box. Hands clutched over my mouth and nose. I finished one long howl and gasped for air. Blood dripped between my fingers and onto the floor. I felt forward with my tongue through the warm pool in my mouth to the bottom row of teeth, torn gum tissue, and 2 jagged marbles dangling from threads, root or flesh, I didn't know. I screamed again. Mom appeared with a towel, a white cotton weave from the bottom drawer in the kitchen by the sink. She pulled my hands away from my mouth and wiped the blood and tears smeared across my cheeks and chin. My wailing and gasping prevented her from getting a better look at the inside of my mouth, and she hushed me, held me firmly against her body with one hand, and gently tugged my chin down with the other. Barbara, you need to sit still so I can see what happened. Hush now. Hold still. I tried to keep still, fought the natural shudder and gasp of my lungs until she'd gotten a good look. I looked up at the speckled shadows on the ceiling while she fished 2 fingers around in my mouth. My mouth was throbbing, hypersensitive and numb at the same time. I could feel the pressure of her hand on my lips and my tongue, but nothing more, until the sharp pain shot through my jaw and down my neck like an electric pulse. She let me go and stepped into the kitchen, her hand cupped around what I knew were 2 baby teeth. Her fingers were smeared with my blood. She returned with a glass of cloudy water and told me to swish it around in my mouth, then spit. I tipped the glass to my tender lips and felt the salty sting of the water. I moved it gently around my intact teeth, over the torn gum tissue, across my tongue. It eased the pain that throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I spit and rinsed until the water in the glass was thickened and crimson. The Nile turned to blood, water turned to wine. I poured it down the sink and rinsed again with a fresh glass of unsalted water. Mom gave me 2 chewable tablets, bubblegum flavored, for the pain, but my teeth felt at odds with my jaw, fragile and loose. I stuffed the tablets into my pocket for later and went to my room, climbed to the top bunk, and fell asleep. When I woke up, Dad's face peered over the railing. His hand rested on my head, and his lips moved around the whispery syllables of his mysterious language. I closed my eyes and waited for him to finish. I listened to the floor creak across the bedroom and into the hallway before I reached into my pocket and up to my mouth. I chewed slowly, gently. I tasted the sweetness of my medicine.